October 21st, 1998, St. Paul, Minnesota. A phone call went unanswered, and before the night was over, an unimaginable tragedy would unfold. Inside a modest apartment, Amanda Carlson-Bey and her 2-year-old son, Jereau, were found lifeless. The scene was unsettling, quiet, too quiet. The initial details made no sense. The door was locked, no signs of forced entry. The young mother had no known enemies. But someone had crossed that threshold, someone who would take not one, but 2 lives that night. Detectives soon learned Amanda had been in a complicated relationship, a relationship that had unraveled in the worst possible way. Questions mounted. Why would anyone commit such a horrific act? And how did it all come to this? This is the story of Amanda Carlson-Bey, her darkest night, and the investigation that uncovered a truth no one wanted to face. Before we continue, if you appreciate in-depth storytelling about real-life crime and justice, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime O'Clock. Your support helps us tell these stories and shed light on the lives that might otherwise be forgotten. Now let's go back to the beginning, to Amanda's world, her hopes, her struggles, and the chain of events that would forever alter the lives of those around her. Amanda Carlson-Bey was 21 years old, a young woman raising her 2-year-old son, Jereau. For Amanda, life wasn't easy, but she made it work. Her days were long, often filled with the demands of balancing work and motherhood, but Jereau was her motivation, her reason for pushing forward. Her friends described Amanda as someone with a quiet strength, someone who rarely complained despite the challenges she faced. Family was everything to her. She relied on them for support, and in return, did everything she could to give her son a better life. Those close to her knew she had dreams, simple ones like saving for a small home where Jereau could grow up safely. But Amanda also carried unseen burdens. Her relationship with Charles Stewart, Jereau's father, had become strained. It was marked by arguments, mistrust. Amanda had recently tried to distance herself from him, focusing instead on providing stability for her son. Yet despite her efforts to move on, something kept pulling her back into that cycle of tension and fear. Family members later recalled subtle changes in Amanda's behavior during those final weeks. She seemed more cautious, more guarded. Something weighed on her mind. But whatever it was, she never spoke about it directly. No one could have imagined how quickly those moments of fear would escalate. What happened next would leave Amanda's loved ones searching for answers that wouldn't come easily. Do you know someone who seems to carry silent worries? Someone who might be masking pain behind strength? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes sharing your perspective can help others see what they might be overlooking. That brings us to the night of October 21st, 1998, the night when everything changed. Amanda didn't answer her phone, and when her family arrived, they walked into a discovery that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. October 21st, 1998. Amanda's family hadn't heard from her all day. At first, they tried to stay calm, telling themselves she was probably just busy with Jereau. But as the hours passed and calls went unanswered, their concern grew. By early evening, the unease became too much to ignore. Amanda's family decided to visit her apartment. They knocked on the door. No response. Everything was still, too still. The door was locked, and without any way to reach her, they made a call to the police. When officers arrived, they forced their way inside. What they found was difficult to comprehend. Amanda was lying on the floor, unresponsive. Blood surrounded her body. A few feet away, little Jereau was found, motionless. There were no signs of forced entry. The apartment was eerily undisturbed, as though the events had happened quickly and quietly. Investigators began documenting the scene, but from the very beginning, they faced more questions than answers. Who could have done this, and why? Word of the discovery spread through the area. Neighbors whispered among themselves, struggling to grasp what had taken place in the apartment just beyond their walls. Amanda had seemed like a devoted mother, with no known enemies. What had gone so wrong? As detectives started piecing together Amanda's final hours, they learned she had recently been trying to distance herself from a troubled relationship. That relationship, and the person at the center of it, would soon become the primary focus of their investigation. Have you ever had a moment where something just felt off and you couldn't explain why? Share your thoughts in the comments. Stories like these remind us to trust our instincts and to check in on those we care about. Detectives were now under pressure to find answers, and fast. Who was Michael Charles Stewart, and what role did he play in the events of that night? The investigation into Amanda Carlson-Bey and Jereau's deaths began immediately. Detectives knew time was critical. The first 48 hours after a crime like this often hold the key to solving the case, but with no signs of forced entry and no immediate suspects, they were starting from a difficult position. One of the first steps was to reconstruct Amanda's final hours. Investigators interviewed her family and close friends. They needed to understand who might have had access to her apartment, and more importantly, who might have had a motive. Over and over, one name came up: Michael Charles Stewart. Michael was the father of Amanda's unborn child. Their relationship had been rocky, marked by frequent arguments and long stretches of tension. According to those close to Amanda, she had recently tried to separate herself from him, but it wasn't that simple. Michael still appeared in her life, sometimes unannounced, and his presence always seemed to bring conflict. Investigators learned that Michael had been scheduled to meet with Amanda on the very day of her murder. Witnesses reported seeing him near the apartment complex that morning. The timeline raised red flags, but detectives needed more than just circumstantial evidence. They needed concrete proof. Forensics teams began a detailed search of Amanda's apartment. They examined every surface, every possible clue. Slowly, pieces began to emerge. Fingerprints, traces of blood, and other evidence that would eventually point back to Michael Stewart. But even with mounting suspicion, detectives couldn't rush to conclusions. They needed to establish not just a theory, but an airtight case. As the investigation deepened, detectives tracked down additional witnesses. One neighbor described overhearing voices, a heated argument, though they couldn't identify who was speaking. Others reported seeing Michael pacing outside the building on multiple occasions in the days leading up to the crime. The pressure on investigators grew. Was Michael Stewart the man responsible for this tragedy? Or were there more pieces to the puzzle yet to be uncovered? Let us know your thoughts. Have you ever seen a situation where a toxic relationship escalated into something dangerous? Stories like these often serve as a reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. Next, detectives would uncover key evidence that would tie Michael to the scene. Evidence that would leave no room for doubt. With Michael Charles Stewart now at the center of the investigation, detectives turned their attention to his background. What they found only raised more concerns. Michael had a history that couldn't be ignored. He had been involved in multiple confrontations over the years, several involving verbal and physical threats. While none had escalated to a serious crime, they painted a picture of someone with unresolved anger issues, someone who could lose control under the right circumstances. The relationship between Michael and Amanda had been unstable from the start. Friends described moments of affection quickly giving way to arguments. Amanda had confided in a few close friends that Michael's temper frightened her. Still, for the sake of her children, she tried to maintain some form of contact, hoping things might improve. But things hadn't improved. In fact, they had only worsened in the weeks leading up to Amanda's death. Detectives discovered that Amanda had recently expressed her desire to cut ties completely. That decision, they suspected, could have been a trigger, something that pushed Michael over the edge. Investigators soon found more direct evidence connecting Michael to the crime. DNA tests confirmed that Amanda's blood was present on clothing that Michael had worn the day of the murder. Forensics also identified matching fingerprints at the scene, fingerprints that matched Michael Stewart. Michael didn't deny being near Amanda's apartment that day. He admitted to visiting her, but his story contradicted the evidence. He claimed the bloodstains were from an unrelated incident and that he had left long before anything happened. Detectives, however, weren't convinced. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices from Amanda's apartment shortly before the estimated time of death. One witness saw a man fitting Michael's description walking quickly toward the exit. But the timeline remained critical to establish. Investigators pressed harder, knowing the case hinged on eliminating any doubts. Despite Michael's attempts to explain away the evidence, the pieces were aligning too perfectly. But as detectives built their case, they knew they needed to be meticulous. Any misstep could jeopardize their ability to hold him accountable. What do you think? Does the evidence so far leave any room for doubt, or does it point squarely at Michael? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes even the smallest detail can change a story like this. The detectives were now ready to make their case in court. But how would Michael defend himself? What arguments would his attorneys use to challenge the mountain of evidence against him? The trial of Michael Charles Stewart began with intense scrutiny from both sides. Prosecutors were confident in their case, but they knew they couldn't leave room for any doubts. Michael's defense team, on the other hand, was prepared to challenge every piece of evidence. The prosecution laid out the facts for the jury. They described how Michael had been in a deteriorating relationship with Amanda Carlson-Bey, how she had tried to distance herself from him, only to have him reappear on the day of her death. They presented forensic evidence, blood traces, fingerprints, and witness testimony placing him near the scene. The argument was clear. This was a crime driven by anger and control. Michael couldn't accept that Amanda was trying to move on, and in his rage, he took her life and the life of their young son, Jereau. But the defense wasn't about to let these points go unchallenged. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no direct proof tying Michael to the exact moment of the murders. His attorney pointed to inconsistencies in the witness statements, suggesting that fear and rumor had distorted their accounts. The defense also questioned the timing of the forensic evidence. They claimed the blood on Michael's clothing could have come from a previous visit to Amanda's apartment. Their goal was simple: to create reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. Then came the emotional heart of the trial, testimonies from Amanda's family. Her loved ones spoke about the fear she had confided in them, how she had expressed concerns about Michael's unpredictable behavior. The courtroom grew silent as her mother recounted the last conversation they'd had, a moment filled with both sadness and urgency. Michael himself took the stand, maintaining his innocence. He insisted that while he had disagreements with Amanda, he would never have harmed her or their child. His words, however, did little to sway the jury. For many, his demeanor seemed detached, as though he was disconnected from the weight of the accusations. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Michael Charles Stewart was found guilty of both murders. The sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Amanda's family, it was a moment of mixed emotions. Justice had been served, but no verdict could undo the loss they had suffered. The courtroom emptied that day, but for those closest to Amanda, the pain remained. They had to rebuild their lives, carrying the memory of Amanda and Jereau with them. What are your thoughts? Do you think the prosecution's evidence was strong enough to convict, or do you believe the defense raised valid questions about reasonable doubt? Let us know in the comments. These discussions help keep these cases in focus. Next, we'll explore the impact of this tragedy on Amanda's loved ones, and how her memory continues to shape efforts to support victims of domestic violence. The conviction of Michael Charles Stewart brought some measure of justice. But for those who loved Amanda Carlson-Bey and her son Jereau, the pain didn't end with the trial. In the weeks and months that followed, their absence was deeply felt by family, friends, and neighbors. Amanda's mother would later say that not a day goes by without thinking of her daughter. She remembers the dreams Amanda had for her children, dreams that were stolen in an instant. Yet, through their grief, her family found strength, determined to honor Amanda's life by raising awareness of the dangers of abusive relationships. They began speaking at community events, sharing Amanda's story to help others recognize warning signs. Local organizations took notice. Advocacy groups worked to expand resources for victims of domestic violence, offering shelters, counseling, and support networks for those in need. Amanda's story became a rallying cry for change so that other lives might be saved. For the residents of St. Paul, the memory of that October night serves as a reminder of how important it is to check in on loved ones, to pay attention to the struggles that often go unnoticed. Amanda Carlson-Bey was more than a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend. Her legacy lives on in the people who continue to fight for a world where no one has to face such danger alone. Now it's your turn. Have you ever encountered situations where early intervention might have prevented tragedy? What advice would you give someone who may be facing a difficult or dangerous relationship? Let us know in the comments. Your voice might make a difference to someone who needs it. If you found Amanda's story moving and believe that these stories deserve to be told, please consider subscribing to True Crime O'Clock. Your support allows us to continue shedding light on stories of courage, loss, and justice. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness or vigilance can change the course of someone's life. This has been True Crime O'Clock. We'll see you next time.